How many of you have seen that movie? All right. How many of you saw the original back in 1979? Oh, a few of you. Okay. I didn't see the original, but I wanted to see this remake because I really like Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine and Alan Arkin. I was sure they would have great chemistry on screen, and I wasn't disappointed. They play, as you can see, three old men named Willie, Joe, and Al, who've known each other for years, who worked for the same company all their lives, who are barely surviving on their pensions, and who are struggling with various financial and health difficulties. Then the company they worked for all those years is sold and restructured, and their pensions are casualties of the restructuring. So Joe gets the idea of robbing a bank, but not just any bank. He wants to rob the bank that is handling the restructuring of the company, who are making millions off of the deal while their pensions disappear. At first, Willie and Al are incredulous, but Joe says those banks practically destroyed this country. They crushed a lot of people's dreams, and nothing ever happened to them. We three old guys, we hit a bank, we get away with it, we retire in dignity. Worst comes to worst, we get caught. We get a bed, 3 meals a day, and better health care than we got now. Al says, I want to rob that bank. So the stage is set. The funniest parts of the movie to me are the lengths these guys go through to learn the ropes of bank robbing. Particularly when you see the film, notice the dry run that they do trying to rob a convenience store. But eventually they come up with a workable plan, and it works. They walk away with more than $2 million. Now, there's a big part of me that wants to high-five Willie, Joe, and Al. Because quite frankly, I'm disgusted with the callous disregard for humanity I see in so much of corporate America these days. They don't care whose lives they crush as long as the company stays profitable and as long as the fat cats keep raking in their multi-million-dollar salaries. Going in Style really taps into the kind of blue-collar anxiety about vanishing manufacturing jobs and Social Security and pensions that drove so much of the last presidential election. So after seeing Going in Style, I wanted to get on a bullhorn and go out on the streets and quote the words from 1 Timothy 6. If it's only money these leaders are after, they'll self-destruct in no time. Lust for money brings trouble and nothing but trouble. Or as the New Revised Standard Version puts it, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. I want to shout to Willie and Joe and Al, you go guys, stick it to the man. But I can't. I know the movie is a fantasy and it's supposed to make you feel good for a couple of hours. But as a Christian, I can't endorse what those three guys do in the film. It's fun in the movie, but it makes me uncomfortable to consider it in real life. I believe with all my heart there is a time and place for civil disobedience, but this is not civil disobedience. This is stealing by intimidation and threat of violence, and I just don't see Jesus practicing that. Granted, Joe, Willie, and Al use only the part of the money they need to relieve their financial stresses, and then they give the rest away to families and friends and co-workers and fellow members of the lodge, which is commendable, but it's hardly Christ-like. So as I thought about it, I wondered, well, what should be the response of Joe, Willie, and Al to this terrible injustice they've suffered? And it occurred to me, where are the rest of the pensioners for this company? Sure, there's a scene in the movie where a bunch of them are gathered for the official announcement from the company, and they all express anger and frustration, but that's as far as it goes. Why aren't all of them deluging this company and the bank with lawsuits? Why aren't they all staging sit-ins at the plant as well as the bank? Why aren't they all pooling their resources so that those who have more than enough can help those who have less than enough? Every problem Willie, Joe, and Al face in this movie could have been addressed by a communal effort from everybody involved. It's happened before. It's the way the early church not only survived in a hostile world, but also thrived. So is Christian community the antidote to this world's greed and callousness? Maybe I'm an idealist. No, I know I'm an idealist. But I really think so. We are in this thing together. And when we stop worshiping the little trinity of me, myself, and I, and start practicing discipleship in all of its countercultural forms, not even the gates of hell can prevail against us. I'm so tired of preachers in their Armani suits and diamond lapel pins quoting today's words from Matthew 7 as if they're strategies for success. Ask, seek, knock, and you'll get whatever you want, whatever you need, they say. Well, I don't know about you, but I've asked, searched, and knocked in prayer all my life, and I'm not driving a Ferrari convertible. No, Matthew's words here make sense only within the context of Christian community. When we ask, seek, and knock within the community, we become more like Jesus. And people who act like Jesus tend to look out for others who act like Jesus. At the age of 85, Albert Schweitzer was visited by some American academics at his medical clinic in Africa. And as the men were walking up a hill on a blisteringly hot day, they spotted an African woman struggling up the hill with a large load of wood. Well, Schweitzer went over and took the entire load of wood from her and carried it the rest of the way. And the visitor said, "Dr. Schweitzer, do you think it's a good idea for a man your age to exert yourself like that?" And Schweitzer said, "No one should ever have to carry a burden like that alone." That's Christian community, my friends. Nobody ever has to carry a heavy burden alone. No one has to embrace this world's worn-out values in order to face whatever problem he or she has. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. Perhaps you've heard the story of a couple of Army buddies during World War II who lost a dear friend in battle. They wanted to give him a decent burial. So they found a Catholic church nearby with a nice little fenced-in graveyard, and they asked the priest if they could bury their friend there. And the priest said, "I'm really sorry, guys. I just can't let you. You see, your friend was not a Catholic, and we're only supposed to bury Catholics in our graveyard." Soldiers, of course, were crushed, and so the priest said, "Tell you what, you can bury your friend just outside the fence, just beyond the cemetery." Well, the soldiers reluctantly agreed, and they buried their buddy beyond the cemetery, just outside the cemetery fence. A few weeks later, their unit happened to come back through the same area, and those two soldiers went to the church to pay their respects to their departed friend. But when they got there, they couldn't find his grave. They thought they knew exactly where it was, but they couldn't find it. So they went to the priest and said, "What happened to our friend? We can't find his grave." And the priest says, "Don't worry, everything's okay." You see, the night after you left, I couldn't sleep at all. And so I went out the next day to the graveyard and I moved the fence. Friends, when the church is the church, when we are at our best, we are in the fence-moving business. When we act like Jesus, we will break every rule, ignore every norm, oppose every tyranny, not to exact revenge, not to get what's coming to us, but to move the fence to include everybody in our circle. whether you know it or not, you pray for that every single Sunday. Whether you know it or not, we pray for that every single Sunday. You pray, along with everybody else, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You see, the way we live together here and now, the way we interact with each other here and now, the way we confront this greedy and indifferent world here and now is supposed to be a reflection of what heaven is like. So it looks like you and I have a lot of work to do. Unrealistic, you say? Naive, you say? Maybe. I guess. When I was in high school, I worked most summers in our family business, the Roswell Seating Company, where we manufactured and installed church furniture. Small to medium-sized churches were our bread and butter, but every once in a while we would get a really large church as our customer. I remember one summer we built pews and pulpit furniture for a large Catholic church in Marietta, Georgia. It was not only a huge building catering to all the Yankees that had moved south over those years, but all of the pews also were mitered, which meant they had to be manufactured in sections and then joined on site at 90-degree angles. It was a huge job for us. So my dad hit on the idea of hiring some day laborers to unload the truck, carry the equipment, move seats and backs of the pews to various locations, and keep the regular employees supplied with nails and screws and whatever else was needed. Now in downtown Marietta, there was an old movie theater called The Strand. Janet, you remember The Strand? Yes, you do. Where men gathered on the sidewalk every day hoping somebody would come by and hire them for the day. So around daybreak, Dad went over to the Strand and talked to some of those guys, told him what he needed them to do, and he said, I'll pay you $10 for the day, which was the going rate back then. He loaded them in the truck, took them off to the job site, and you know what? They were good workers. They were really good workers, and I should know, since like them, I was also unskilled labor, to put it mildly. So I spent the day doing what they were hired to do, unloading the truck, moving pieces of furniture, supplying the skilled workers with supplies. It was the dog days of summer during a heat wave that made a normal Georgia summer feel like a cool drink under a shade tree. And the temperature in that sanctuary building was worse than outside. But we soldiered on. By 9 o'clock, Dad realized we needed more workers, so he went back to the Strand, got some more guys, and told them, I'll pay you what's fair. They helped, but the job was so huge, he had to go back to the Strand at noon and then again at 3 o'clock for more men. Then late in the afternoon, not long before quitting time, he had to run an errand into Marietta, and he saw a few men standing in front of the Strand, and he stopped and he said, why are y'all just standing around here? And one of them said, because nobody's hired us. Dad said, climb in, I'll give you something to do. Finally, the day was over. We put down our tools, wiped the sweat from our faces, and all those day laborers gathered and waited for their pay. Dad started paying with the guys he hired last. And he paid them $10 apiece. Well, I happened to be standing next to one of the guys who was hired at dawn, a fellow named Leon, and I heard him say to a buddy, look, he's paying them $10 apiece. That means we're going to get more because we've been working all day. But everybody Dad paid that day got a $10 bill. Right down to the folks who had been hired first. And they were stunned. What is this? They groused. This isn't fair. So Leon went to my dad and said, look, this isn't right. You paid those yahoos the same as us, and they only worked for about an hour. We've been working in this steaming hot building, working our tails off all day long, and we get the same pay they do? Dad just smiled and said, "Look, friend, I hadn't been unfair. We agreed on a wage of $10, didn't we? So take your pay and go home. I decided to give to the one who came last, the same as you. Can't I do what I want with my own company's money? Or are you going to get stingy because I'm generous?" Now, those of you who are biblically savvy will know none of that happened. The story isn't even mine. It's one of Jesus' stories. So go look it up in Matthew chapter 20, and you'll find that it begins with these words: "The kingdom of God is like this." Looks like you and I have a lot of work to do.